interested in me being gay, basically. Here you can see two maps, Kazakhstan and Tatarstan. And Tatarstan is not this huge country, this is Russian Federation. Tatarstan is that red spot. So before we start, I want you to read this. Not every linguist is gay, but every gay is a linguist. And try to think what could it be and what it means for you. Do you think it's true? Do you think it's not true? We will not discuss this now. We will come to that by the end of my talk. And I'll try to, with my talk, to bring you to different perspectives why this statement could be true. So who am I? Some of you might know me, some of you might not know me. My name is Marsel Ganeyev. I'm from Kazakhstan. I'm doing my PhD in medical science in Sweden right now. I'm also a language and queer activist. And I'm originally from South Kazakhstan, small town, it's called Kintal. It's in Turkestan region, and ethnically I'm Russian, Turkic, and Tatar. And I hold the citizenship of Kazakhstan. I mention this because it's very important to understand the background, to see the things why I will, what I will be talking about today. And I highlighted here that I'm certified Russophobe, and I have my certificate from Russian State TV. Because some of you might know Россия 24. They made a whole reportage about me. Discussing who am I, what am I. They even invited a Tatar expert to try, and the thing that was very controversial for them, that they could not understand the fact that I'm gay. I'm from Kazakhstan, I'm Tatar, and I'm also Russophobe. Because they could not consolidate it in their heads. I'm not Russophobe because Russophobia does not exist, but yes, for some reason they had this in their head. You can ask me later why did they make it and what it was about, but it's not so important right now. Okay, I'll show some screenshots. So this is a map of Kazakhstan, and I'm right from here. Far south Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is the 9th biggest country in the world, so it's very huge, and it's very different in different regions. As in Germany, Bavarian people are very different from the people from Berlin, from Hamburg. It's the same in Kazakhstan. They are all very different in many senses, in the sense of who we ethnically are, but also what languages we speak, and what kind of tea tradition do we have. Because tea tradition is very important in our space. In Central Asia, we drink lots of tea. And I will present to you a bit later my tea tradition. But even within one family, it can vary a lot. And as an example of tea tradition, it's kind of relevant to being queer and to the languages that you speak, because they all consolidate the complexity of your being, in a sense. And I myself relate a lot to the tea. Some of you might relate more to coffee, I guess. But yeah. To understand a bit even more about my background, my hometown was founded in 1955. It was partly built by Japanese prisoners of war who were deported by USSR to far south in Kazakhstan. Many of them died in the 90s, some of them returned because then they were released to go to Japan in the 50s, and they built this monument. So in the middle of nowhere, in the south of Kazakhstan, there was me, Tatar, Russian Tatars, going around this Japanese monument. But also my hometown was a hometown for many Greek people, because Stalin happened to one day decide and deport them to South Kazakhstan. Many of them are living in Greece right now, and they're called Greek Pontas, Russopontas. because they had an opportunity to return. But here you see a grape that I explored actually this year when I was in the mountains. And if my hometown is in the middle of nowhere, then this cemetery was even more in the middle of nowhere. And it's written here in Greek, and it's written that this person was born in Trabzon. And Trabzon is a Turkic now. So it was a Pontos Greek from Turkey who happens to go probably to Georgia or to Krasnodarski Krai in Russia, and then be deported all the way to South Kazakhstan and die there. And funny thing that my dad, for example, he's cursing in Greek because so many Greeks were living around. So he's using cursing words in Greek because it's more convenient and he's more used to them. And yeah, and in general, in my language background, it was super complex because I was surrounded by Azeri people, Uzbek people, Kazakh people, Russians, Greeks, Tatars, Ukrainians, and it was all building up into me, and I was enjoying it. So yeah, now coming back to the tea, what is special about it? In my family, so it's my dad was born in South Kazakhstan, and the way we do tea is that we always drink it from, in Kazakh you say kese, in Tatar you say piala. You don't bring it from this kind of things, you don't bring it from big glasses, and it's very important. But also the way you pour tea is very important. For example, this is not the best example that is going to be here, because here we will be dissolving tea with some water from the samovar, because this one is chifir. It's like there is too much tea inside. But also the amount of tea that you put in, it should be, I don't know if you can see here, a little bit less than the middle of the cup. Because if you put more, then you disrespect the person. So yeah, and if you want a guest to leave, like because it's time for the guest to leave, then you put up to a lot of tea, so that the guest knows. Like you don't have to tell the guest that it's time to leave. The guest just sees the amount of tea in there, and then the guest leaves. It's just my family. For different people, the traditions are very different, but we all love tea, and that's all the thing that brings us together. And the same with sometimes languages and queerness. We are all very different. It's all different complexities of different things. But queer is such a good word to describe us because it brings all that complexity into the state when you don't need to label it. So yeah, now let's go a bit to the background and come back to the queer. What is the queer language of Kazakhstan and Tatarstan? Some of you might know more about Kazakhstan and Tatarstan, some of you might know less, but I put some important facts that are important for today. So both of these states were a part of Russia sometime and part of the Soviet Union. Kazakhstan, the colonization of Kazakhstan started around 1731, but it continued for much longer until it all became the part of Russia. And Tatarstan became a part of Russia a really long time ago, 1552, the conquest of Kazan, which was a very bloody event. But then Kazakhstan got the independence in 1991. Tatarstan never got the independence. Not yet. Then the population, the growth of population I'm showing you, it just was from 1991 to the present day. And this percentage is very important. It's the percentage of ethnic Kazakhs there and ethnic Tatars, the growth of it in the past 30 years. So in Kazakhstan, it was the only country in the Soviet Union where the percentage of ethnic building, the state building ethnicity was less than Russian. So in Kazakhstan, by the independence time, there were more Russians than Kazakhs. Now the situation changed. Now it's 69% Kazakhs, but still, it's very important to keep in mind. In Tatarstan, we have just a little growth, but Right now, it's more than 50%. And state languages in Kazakhstan is just Kazakh, but Russian has some kind of status because it can be used everywhere, and it's pretty much very dominant. And you can get a full education in Russian, and you can live your life in many places normally without not even knowing Kazakh. In Tatarstan, it's Tatar and Russian. However, the Tatar itself, in the past years, it was disappearing a lot, unfortunately. One of the major events was in 2017 when it was abolished from schools as a mandatory subject. Now it's an elective, but it deserves a separate lecture. It's just for you to understand what people we are talking about. So these people are mostly bilingual, or they know, they might be native in Russian or in Kazakh, but the other language is still present in their life. And to a very high extent, Russian is a dominant, especially in the queer space, because where LGBT comes from Europe, from Europe, from Western concepts very old. Yeah. Now let's come to the language itself. What is it? Why is it? Why it is queer? Why are we discussing it today? If you look at general features of the languages, of these two languages, they're both Turkic. They're very similar. They have 70% of common vocabulary, and they have a single pronoun. So it's just all. We don't have he, she, it. It's just all, and we don't need to distinguish in that sense. That's why when you're, for example, talking about your partner, if you don't specify several things, you don't really understand if it's a man or it's a woman. So very clear in that sense. No feminisms needed because no gender. Names are very often universal. For example, name Ainur, which could be a man and a woman. But even their colonization affected it a little because names were changed. For example, some of the feminine names were changed more into Russian way of saying them so that they sound more feminine. Then this words, Roldas, Roldas is a partner. So when you want to say my wife, my husband, you just say Roldas. Or in Russian, also, if you want to say just a husband, you just say a man. And if you want to say a wife, it's just a woman. Then if we go more to the queer-related vocabulary, what words can we find? Very often, in these two spaces, when we speak about us being gay, we use a lot of westernized words. We used a lot of Russian words to say who we are, what we are. I'm a lesbian, I'm gay, I'm gay, I'm non-binary, I'm trans. But what are the words that we have in archaic versions of our language? First word is kutak. Here you see the Turkic description of this word. It comes from a very old times, from the old Turkic vocabulary of the word, kutuk, the word kutuk, and it basically means faggot, pederast. However, here the description that I took, that I found from the vocabulary, from this dictionary, it's in Kazakh, and it says that it's a word that describes the person who is kustike. But what is kustike? We will come to it later. And it says burunga ayedel falan yerkeklerin also, which means that the person who behaves like a woman, so pretty much very feminine. But is it like that or not? Very questionable. And for you to understand, this is an offensive word, and it's not really being used right now. So if you talk to Tatar or Kazakh person, they don't really know this word in a sense. So it's some kind of archaic word. Another word here is kustike. There is a version of it in Tatar, which is idaka. And kustike, it's a person, a man, who has a character, very feminine character, who behaves like a woman, who has several features of what people believe woman is, in the Kazakh society at least. And same with Tatar. However, in Kazakh, this word is still pretty much used. In Tatar, questionable. I just found a little number of articles where it was used by the journalist. And some similar word, yerkek soran, I know there was a Hatuncha and here is Erka. Yeah. And it's an opposite version when it's a girl who performs the things that the man is performing, or who is wearing the clothing that the man are supposed to wear. So if we go deeper into these words, who is Yerkek Shora? So if you Google this are the pictures that are depicting Yerkek Shora. So it's some kind of masculine woman in the masculinity sense that we can present. In the Kazakh society, normal society, it's a woman who rides a horse, woman who is participating in the battles. But the interesting thing, it's not an offensive word; it's a good word. So if you say that a woman is Yerkek Shora, it actually means that she's on the higher level of the society. And here I depicted a poem by Shatarin Davidolo, and we here describe daughter of the bai, of the very rich person who had no kids, and there was this daughter that he was teaching her to be a man. And very interesting thing that in some of the literature, it's written that if some people would refer to this Yerkek Shora person as a girl, she will be offended. So if she would be told that she's a woman, she's getting offended because she's Yerkek Shora. Interesting. Yeah, I took this nice video of my friend actually. I hope I can run it. Yeah. So that's basically could be a modern Yerkek Shora. And this is a golden man, a symbol of Kazakhstan. And why I put him or her here, because there is a lot of discussion if it's a man or it's a woman. Because officially a lot is considered is being considered as a man. However, the bones of the skeleton that was found disappeared for some reason. So now we cannot say if it's a man or it's a woman, but the head that this person has is pretty much the one that women would wear at the time. So it's Psyche time, the Iron Age. And at that time, it was very often that women would participate in many things that men would do. Now we're coming to an opposite word, Pickle. And this is the depiction that we have. So who you see? A man who uses makeup, sometimes it's a trans man, which is very interesting. And all of the depictions in here, the articles, they're pretty much offensive. And it's some kind of a thing on Kazakh state media that they invite sometimes acoustic game. So a person who performs a lot of feminine-like practices and some kind of religious representative or respected person, and they would have an argument. And what was funny in one of these TV shows, it actually ended up with a person coming back to the male state. So he's taking off the makeup, taking off the dress, yeah, and now he's a man. It's very interesting because also there is an article that I found by this journalist, Saule Abildahan Kuzu, and she wrote the whole article saying Kustike is not gay. So it was very important for her to define, because sometimes in some of the media, the journalists would use the word Kustike with the word gay, with the person, the people who are gay. However, if you look deeper in it, it's more about trans people, right? When you have some kind of transition into a different gender. And apparently for her, it was very important to define that this is not gay, this is trans. And she actually wrote that it was always in Kazakh society. It was not brought from somewhere. It was there. So there is a discussion. Now we're coming to a different thing. I know there are some Kazakhs here. Do you know where it's from? Maybe. No? No? Okay. So it's a poem written from a man to a man. There was a big rebellion against Russian state by Mahomet Utimisulu and Isatai Taimanov. They were from the West Kazakhstan, and Mahomet Utimisulu, he was a poet, and he was writing odes, the poem to Isatai Taimanov. And if you read it in Kazakh, all of these great things, the great words that I put in there, it's the words describing him as being a very heroic, being a very like lion, and being referred to the poet. So you are my hero, you are my lion. And in Kazakh schools, in the Kazakh literature class, you actually learn it. And all the very often that the students of the high school, they start giggling. It's too gay. It's very gay. You read it and it's apparently gay. And you know, it's like two people, heroic people that are being put on the highest level of the society in Kazakhstan. There are sweet names with them, and they're writing gay poems to each other, which is interesting. But it's a speculation from me, right? And from the school children, because that's the way we see now gay. But were they gay? I don't know. But it's just interesting to see what it is. However, there is also a Russian translation of this poem. And what is interesting, they took out those words. They made it less gay. Because apparently they thought it's gay. And they just made it less gay. And that's actually very often the case. Now we come, so we understand, right? We have Kazakh community, Tatar community, which are bilingual. So these languages, they constantly interact with each other. At least since the beginning of 20th century, they were interacting a lot in all senses, in all aspects of the life. And these two people are very famous. It's Dostoevsky and Shokan Valikhanov. And they are writing also letters to each other. Those who understand Russian, I can read a little, but basically it's also a letter, very gay letter. At least the way we see it right now, and it's being used by Kazakh people a lot to describe the gayness or to describe the love to each other, and they're used as an examples of love. However, we cannot claim that Valikhanov was gay or Dostoevsky was gay, or they were bisexual at least. We can just speculate and think about it and look into it and make our own conclusions in a sense and use it for something that could be used by us. So here it's written: «Мне так приятны эти немногие дни, проведенные с вами, Семипалатинский, что теперь только о том и думаю, как еще побывать у вас. Я не мастер писать о чувствах и расположении, но думаю, что это ни к чему. Вы, конечно, знаете, как я к вам привязан, как я вас люблю». Yeah, it's very gay. So now we come to a different part, which is folklore. Because language is one thing, right? We look at the language structure, what is it, what is the gender relation in the language, what words we use for describing the sexuality, what words we use to assault people. But folklore is also another example because it's being transferred from people to people. It's very often dates to the pre-Islamic phases in both Kazakh and Tatar cultures. And the relationship with folklore very much is connected to the nature. And nature kind of tends to be less homophobic in a sense. So I have a short exercise for you. Yeah, I want you to close your eyes. But maybe I'll show you these pictures for inspiration. So yeah, try to imagine that you are being in a Tatar family of both parents are Tatar, who speak perfect Tatar, and they just tell you the fairy tale, and they describe you this creature from the fairy tale. So that's how this description goes. They look like humans, but different from human beings. They live in forests, and their height can change from the size of grass to the size of trees. The body resembles the human body, but cannot sometimes be differed from the surrounding trees. Tatars give them a name of Shurale. Chuvash give them the name of Akçura. Their arms are long. When they walk, their hands come to their knees, and sometimes their sharp nails touch the ground. They do not have any hair on the fingers. They're covered with lots of wrinkles, skinny in height. They sling their large breasts over the shoulders, the right one over the right one, the left one over the left one. And sometimes they appear as a man, sometimes they appear as a woman. And never ask for help from them and never smile to them, because then they tickle you to death. So I don't know what you imagined, but it's a pop star of Tatar folklore, of Tatar culture in a sense. And his name is, or her name is Shurale. Sorry. Yeah, and it became a pop star very much because of this person, who wrote a children's book about Shurale. But even before that, parents would always read to their kids the story of Shurale that would change sometimes. Why Shurale is queer? No, maybe no words are needed, I think, because let's just look how Shurale is depicted by different painters. I don't know. They sometimes live with the families. Some people believe that they were actually humans. It was a tribe of people who lived in the forest of Tatarstan, of Volga region, because they appear also in Mari, they appear in Udmurt, in Chuvash, in Bashkort, sometimes in Kazakh folklore. And there is a ballet with Shurale. Ballet is generally kind of queer, but Shurale makes it even more gay. And yeah, here on the right, I don't know, because the storyline that goes with Shurale is that this Jagit, the guy, he comes into the forest and he is getting lost and he meets a Shurale. And then the Shurale tries to tickle him with his long fingers to death, but then the guy tricks the Shurale and cuts off his fingers. Yeah, that's just one description. So let's maybe talk here a little with Shurale and think how this creature could inspire us now, what we could do with this creature. Can we openly say that he's queer or not? I don't know, it's a big question. But for me, it kind of came unconscious that Shurale is queer. I don't know for what reason, and it came to me that he's queer just really randomly. And then I started to find more and more proofs that he is actually queer, and proofs from other people. So to celebrate our queerness, we can use the folklore itself to inspire us, to inspire our queerness and to present it to our society. Because very often in Kazakh and Tatar context, we hear from people that queerness is being brought from the West. Queerness that has not existed in our world. Queerness is spoken with the word of English. Queerness is spoken with the word of this LGBTQI+, all these labels that we put on. And my thought as an activist is that we can actually use the language of the people we are trying to bring to understanding that queerness is not a bad thing by speaking their language, showing them things that they are familiar with for so long. So Shurale, I actually wrote a fairy tale from Tatar last year, and it was about some guy, Tatar prince, being born in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan. once going to the mountains, falling asleep, and then Shuralya comes in a dream, starts to tickle him to wake him up. And then he tells him that he is a Tatar prince and he needs to go to Tatarstan and save it from the world of darkness, which is Russia. Yeah, but the thing is that at that point when I was writing it, I had no idea that Shurale resembles so many queerness in himself. But then when I was preparing for this lecture, I found so many things. For example, in Kazan, in Kazakhstan, in the capital, there was a gay club that was called Shurale. You've been there? Yeah, and I even found an article where they were interviewing the founder of the club, who ended up being homophobic.
Yeah, she's really homophobic.
Very interesting, right? She opened a gay club, but she was yeah, and her Tatar friend advised her to name this place Shurale. It has a language play because Shura is a Russian gay pop star. Yeah? And we have this resemblance with Shurale, which is very, very interesting. Another concept from Tatar folklore that we can take is the concept, the fairy tale, the story of Sok for two brothers, and it's a cursed fairy tale, and they were destined to spend the rest of their life together. Fine. No, I had this illustration on the left at home when I was a kid, and I actually thought it's very gay. But also here on the right, I'll show it a little later. In the theater of Kazan in Mon, there is a very homoerotic performance designed by Batua, which they're also using the Kudesh, if I understand correctly, which is a way of wrestling that is being used by many Turkic nations, which is also very gay because it's lots of any wrestling and it's lots of contact. But we see this thinking of people trying to look into the images that they have in their heads from the childhood and make them something that is queer. Now, another example that I took from Turkey. We have here a Shahmiran, a ruler of snakes. And actually in Turkey, when Erdogan was introducing his anti-gay policies, this figure was used as a protest, gay protesting. But it's in general very much used in protest figure, because this figure was also used by Kurdish people to protest against the violence towards them. And some other examples from Kazakh. Here we got Kisin, Pushkin, and Kurmangazli, which is a super interesting example. It never ended up on streets of Almaty, but it was designed for the advertisement of a gay club in Almaty, which is called Studio 69. It was the first gay club in Almaty, and it was on the intersection of the streets of Pushkin and Kurmangazli. Yeah. But this thing is also very post-colonial, because here we bring up two very important figures from Russian culture and Kazakh culture and putting them on the same level. It's not that Pushkin is on a higher level than Kurmangazli is not a different person. Same. Although, if you go to Russian school in Kazakhstan, you learn first about Pushkin, not Kurmangazli. About Abay, questionable, I don't know. Because for us it was always fairy tales. I guess it depends on the teacher also. But yeah. And here it's Batar, very heroic person from Kazakh culture that is also being used for the art against actually the introduction in Kazakhstan of anti-gay propaganda law that the government tried to introduce similar to Russia in 2014. However, it did not succeed thanks to Europe. And thanks to the activists from Kazakhstan, because they went to the Court of Human Rights, and yeah, this law just existed for 6 months, and then it was taken away. Another example from Kazakh folklore. You can read this post in June. Last week here there was presenting Sultanat, and she was talking about that. But basically, this is a very interesting text about Thomas Kempler, Jesternat Albasta, who who have lots of lesbian storylines of interactions of older women with younger women, sucking the nails, sucking the fingers, which is also interesting and could be used. Another thing is the erotics of Kazakh folklore, because we kind of think, oh, it's so conservative when we talk about, for example, Kazakh or Tatar, but it's actually not. People used to talk much more about dicks and tits and everything before. We just kind of don't talk about it now in Kazakh. We prefer Russian. And another cool example is the work done by Tatar. I actually asked her how much of the work that she does is preparation. She said not much, not a preparation at all. So what she does, she goes back into the depictions of Kazakh folklore stories, and she just searching there for the storylines where we have a gender transition, or we have any kind of homo experience, lesbian experience, gay experience, and there is quite a lot. We won't be looking into that now, but you can ask me. I will send it. I think it will take too much time. Now we're coming to a different thing. So we have a language, we have a folklore. We can find some kind of queer, gay examples in there. We can speculate. We can say Valikhanov was bisexual, Vasilevsky was bisexual. We can say in Kazakh there is no slur words to assault gay people, how queer-friendly this language is, blah, blah, blah. But is it the case? Who we are, what we are? Should we try to go in our activism just to Tatar and Kazakh stop speaking Russian just to be more queer-friendly? No, because we are bilingual. We are the products of this post-colonial state. I wrote post-Soviet because for Tatarstan it's not still a part of Russia, right? It's pretty much even, it's not worse actually. Right now, the Tatar language, as I read and as I think myself, comes to the part to such a state as it was by the end of the Soviet Union. At least in the way it's taught and not taught. But yeah, let's try to look at this. Who these are, what these are. Why did I put them here? If someone can speculate. So up there we have Kazakhs. Down here we have Tatars. What is very special about these pictures? Why did I put them here? National costumes. Why? What is special about this national costume?
Wrong representation.
Exactly. It's not historically accurate, that's one thing. The other thing, the materials that I use, they're also not historically accurate. Very cheap materials. The colors that I use, they're not historically accurate. Are these costumes functional? Can we go in them on the streets? No, not really. But before, were they functional? For sure they were functional because people were wearing them. Who designed this? Russian state designed it. Not Russian state, Soviet state, right? Why they did it? Because they were trying to come to the image of the Soviet citizen that will be very pulled up. They will be very similar. But they will have their ethnicity because it was very important to point out the ethnicity in the Soviet Union. To say who you are, Kazakh, Tatar, whatever. And you will have your language that you use in the kitchen. You know how to cook national dishes. You know how to put some tea. And you will wear this kind of things to say, look at me, I'm Kazakh, I'm Tatar. So, yeah. So,
And Ukrainian friends said that they even designed those Ukrainian costumes also. And the reason for all of that was to put all other nations than Russian into this bucket of kind of coming from the countryside, also a little bit making them different and making them
celebrating this difference, but
in reality not celebrating, but kind of praising over them.
exactly. How did they look before?
I mean, like, if you look at the atlases and every book of the Soviet Union from the 80s to 70s, like, you look it up to see the number of pieces.
Yeah.
I used to read this as a child, right? And the costumes that were presented, to be honest, they would be, obviously, they were recognized, they were not to be children of the time period, but you have to read the ideology of some weird. It was more that everybody was somehow equal. Like, yes, of course, like in the 30s it was brutal, but then, like, they just had to take the top with the bigger brothers, but Russians also had to kind of westernized costumes. You cannot say that they children costumes.
We can take this discussion later, but I would just say that Russians, of course, had their part in a sense in that. But when
Germany and say, yeah, Hitler took the Southern German costume and made it the whole German costume. Like nobody in the north wears the scarf. I don't know.
No, I'm talking.
No, like of course you can compare it with the like post-colonial experience and like a colonial experience. Yeah, Germany was a colonizator, but again,
Why am I showing this? Why is it important?
yeah,
I'm showing this because I'm showing this because not to think that Russians were less assaulted. I don't want to talk about it, to be honest, right now. But because this thing is not about Russia, it's just about us, what we are. We don't need to say that Russians had as much harm as we did. The thing here is not about Russians, it's about Kazakhs and Tatars being put into the box of what they are. And the thing is that the standardized version of the Soviet person, not Russian person, Soviet person, was very much equalized to the Russian person in terms of language and very often in terms of culture. If it was original Russian culture, for sure, maybe not. But it was equalized very much to the concept of who Russian is. And it's not just for no reason that right now, when we go outside in the world of Europe, in America, anywhere, and you present yourself, I'm from Kazakhstan, you're Russian? They don't say you're Soviet, they say you're Russian. And there is a reason for this. Now, let's go back and think what we look like. Yeah? We look something like this, maybe. But you see a tremendous difference, how it got simplified. These are Kazakh people. And this is a lot about exotification. And I can put you this video. Some of you have already seen it. But maybe no. No. Yeah. Yeah, I told you. That's why I asked you not to tell me. So this is Uyghur. And it's taken from Xinjiang. It's a Chinese propagandist TikTok. Why is it special? What's interesting about it?
It's very similar.
It's very similar. It's very similar. You know what they did in Kashgar? Kashgar is a very ancient place. They destroyed all the ancient buildings and they built the new ones. So they did not just erase it and build something. They built the same stuff. But they made it non-functional. They made museums out of it. And the same with Uyghur people. They seem here very happy. I don't know if you have Uyghur friends from Xinjiang. I do have friends. They're very sad. I have Tatar friends, I have Kazakh friends, I have Uyghur friends from Xinjiang. They're very sad. And this thing is very sad because it's happening right now. And it's very much connected to the work camps, right? So we are being left with this right now. And what things come to our mind? Some of us speak more Russian, some of us speak more Tatar, some of us speak more Kazakh. But how do we relate to our own queerness? How do we relate to homophobia? Where it's being born, where it's coming from? And when I was reflecting on it, I realized two things. That homophobia is a product of Russian colonization. But also homosexuality is also being seen as a product of Russian colonization. But which one is correct? There is no correct, right? Because homophobia always existed, homosexuality always existed. They just were projected by different ways, in a sense, I would say. But why homophobia is a product of Russian colonization? There are certain facts that bring that because I would say institutionalized homophobia was a product of Russian colonization. Because with the colonization of Kazakhstan, they brought the institutionalized religion, Islam, and they actually used Tatars to colonize Kazakhstan because Tatars were the translators, and they would come to the mosque and they would build the mosques, and there the homosexuality was something that was forbidden. Why homosexuality is a product of Russian colonization? Because right now, if you talk to a very conservative Kazakh guy from my town, and you ask where homosexuality comes from, he tells you from Russia. It comes from the West. Like to Russia comes from the West, to us it comes from Russia. And I have a very good example of this. Let's watch this video. Can I? So I don't know if everyone understood, but in the beginning, the guy came to his son and he took away the profit and spoke to his father. And then several years after, the guy comes to the parents with a Kazakh wife, sends her to them, and they're very happy. And the second case, he was speaking Russian to them, and he gave him this poppy, which is this rainbow. And then the guy comes back 3 years later with a husband. So it's very funny, but it's very interesting because he sees Russian language as a gay language in a sense, because it's more Western. If you look, it's more from the West. But if you look at the reality, legally in Kazakhstan, homosexuality is much less persecuted than in Russia. In Kazakhstan, it's not officially persecuted at all. But that's the image that we have in the heads of people, because they're very much connected to the context of the homophobia that comes from Russian-speaking space, also a lot, that it comes from the West. And sometimes it's not being born within the language itself, it's being brought to the language. Which is super interesting. So what we can use to fight with it, yeah, to do something. Who we are, what we are, why we are. There are many things that we can do, such as reflection, decolonization, consciousness, complexity as post-colonial state, language. These are many words. But what I mean by that is that we should realize we should try to reflect more on what we are and who we are. In terms of queerness, in terms of language, and in terms of the perceptions of gender and sexuality that we have. Because very often when you even just look at the activism and people try to bring in the Central Asia, these concepts are very Western. They're so unfamiliar to people. And maybe we can try to develop our own concepts of that. And many people are doing that. I showed you some of the examples. And it's also very much connected to the decolonization. But what I mean by the decolonization, it's looking more into what it was. It doesn't mean that we should give up the colonial thing that we have, right? Because we are the products of everything that we have. But sometimes we're just using one set of the products and ignoring the other. And the complexity of us, it's so beautiful. I love to celebrate it, at least. I'm sure all of you are very complex in the ways you're built as your language identities, religious identities, ethnic identities, state identities. But it all builds into something very beautiful. How to work with it? Research the hidden behind the colonial frame. Research like with the dresses, right? With the costumes, we can look into what it was before, what it was interesting about that, and I think that is very important to do it consciously, not just to take it out of the context. Find your own way and explore the complexity, develop and transform. However, the question how to deal with the speculation. Can we just say that Kurman Brazil was, not Kurman Brazil, that Mohamed Chimisu and Tatar were gay, and they're now my gay heroes? Can we do that? I think no. Because it's a very radical way in a sense, and we will be cancelled even more by conservative people because now we're taking their heroes from the culture and trying to make them gay for just by saying that we think that that thing is gay. But we could bring it up and just leave it there and show it is what it is. Think of it as you want, without giving any context into it. Now, what is the examples in Kazakhstan of language decolonization, right? Because it's not just that the result of colonization, but not like, let's say, the result of Russian being used by majority is not just the thing that we have to deal with, because Russian, the language itself, it changes a lot. And in Kazakh, there are some initiatives that are trying to decolonize the language. For example, on the left is the example of the names. Here we have the names Asema, Asela, Aygula, Aynura. In the original version, there are Asem, Asel, Aygul, Aynur. Why did they become Asema, Asela, Aygula, Aynura? Because when we are talking to the Russian language, we have Aya, Krasivaya, Haroshaya. So the ending A, Aya, is the representation of the femininity of someone who is a woman. That's why we adapt our names to that. Another example, okay, it's not here. Another example that I will tell you is the name that is Ulbolsun. Ulbolsun, it's a set of names in Kazakh language. It's a very patriarchal society, right? And it's very important in a nomadic community to have a boy as a kid. So when the family just has 5 kids and they're all girls, they give to the 5th girl the name Ulbolsun, which actually means let the next one be a boy. And you're kind of stigmatized with this name forever. Like your name is just this, the next one, that's the next one be a boy. How we can rethink this concept, what we can do. Yeah, there is an example of Kızbolsun. So now people take this name and they make it kız bolsun. Let the next one be a girl. And it's very interesting because it's very often being used by feminist people and by queers and by trans people, which is super nice. Another thing, we can move into the space where the language is being used right now. Yeah, the media that we're using. TikTok, Hornet, VK. I gave here example. So what do I mean by that? Is that in Kazakhstan there is this public community in Russian Facebook called Conductive, which means gay, lesbian, Kazakhstan. And it's super interesting to go into there and just read the post because people write just about things that bother them. And depending on the context, sometimes they use Russian, sometimes they use Kazakh. And it's very interesting how they talk about gay things, choosing the language. Because sometimes the whole text could be written in Kazakh, but gay things written in Russian. Like why? But then, yeah, it's interesting to explore. And here on the right, it's a very funny example for me. It's a post from Hornet, which is like a grinder or Tinder. And here we got this guy who posted this picture and the poem by Mukhahali Makatayev, which is a classical Kazakh poet talking about love. And it's very nice, like making it, just putting it there and saying, it's also mine, I'm a person there. Yeah, but another interesting thing is the group consolidate, which means the blue book, because in Russian, you know, you use the word cowboy to describe gay people. It's mostly an offensive way, so not super offensive like faggot, but still offensive. And in this group, the guy is making a set of stories fully written in Kazakh, erotic gay stories. And he's making it all by himself. It's not a huge community, it's like 1,000 followers. I contacted him, he's living in the suburbs of Kazakhstan, in the Kazakh region. And it's just so amazing. I love it. Because you see the development, you see how it goes, you see that the queer is not just being represented by Russian, because if you talk to Tatar people, and you ask them, can you send me something gay in Tatar? It's very difficult. Even just a post written about gay rights or gay things, there are very few materials to find. So the thing that we can do, we can create content, we can make it more, make it cool, make it nice. Another example is using language as a process. Yeah, I just told you about full Bolson changing to good Bolson. Here I give an example of using Uyghur language in Xinjiang. It's a very nice article if you want to read. In the beginning of all the oppression that happened in Xinjiang, in East Turkestan, Uyghurs were using a lot the language. They would not speak Mandarin. They would just speak Uyghur as a protest. And right now, with Russian war in Ukraine, we also see that because the ethnic groups of Russia, the languages of Russia, are also being used to say things against the war. So it's a protest. And I talked to my Tatar friend from Kazan, who is gay, and his boyfriend is also Tatar and he's also gay. And they told me that as a protest, they actually switched totally to Tatar. They would prefer just to speak Tatar and not speak Russian. And he told me an interesting thing that they introduced 2 new words in their vocabulary, which is pisiliano and mesheliano. Pisi is like a cat, but more, I don't know, angry. Like not very cute cat, just a cat. No. Nashe is the not very cute cat, just a cat, and PC is like a very cute piece. And they transfer them into the verbs to describe the actions that they do, being cute with each other, like kissing, etc. which is super interesting. It's like the development of the language and making it clear in a sense. Some other examples of using language as a process here on the left, we have a Komi activist who was arrested during Navalny protest, and he denied speaking Russian in the court. He was just speaking Komi language. And another example is Azat Miftahov, who is a Tatar political prisoner in Russia. And when I was in Kazan 2 years ago, during the Republic Day, which was super interesting, this band Usal was performing in the Kremlin in the center of Kazan, on the central square. And they were screaming from the stage in Tatar, Azat Azat, Azat Miftahov Azat. There's freedom to Azat. How was that allowed? It's very interesting. But it seems like if they would do that in Russian, that would be instantly leaked into the media. And this person would get arrested, like he will not get performed. But using Tatar, it kind of, excuses him. He can do that, which is interesting. That's a performance of Sak and Sok, which I call very homoerotic. I don't think we have time to look at it right now, because I'm going very slowly. And now a little about the colonization of fashion. So what it means. The thing is that we have this framed perception of national costumes that were created by the Soviets. We just have it. We are living with it. We go to schools, we put these costumes on, we perform. But when we try to go deeper enough into understanding of our ethnic identity and looking into those ethnic costumes, what we can do? Because we cannot just replicate and take the costumes from the museum and put them on and say, oh, they're so functional, they're so cool. But we can look into the context where they were used and make them in such a way so that they will be used, they will be nicely looked, but they won't be oversimplified. Because very bad examples from Kazakh space. In Kazakhstan, there is oyu ornek, which is an ornament, different kinds of ornaments, and people would just put them with, and they all have meanings because it's a language of ornament, and there's a huge science behind that. And people would just put them on the hoodies or put them in some kind of modern clothing, and they would say, "Look, this is ethnic identity. This is cool. Let's wear it." Why I think it's not very nice, because it's taken out of the context. All those things, they had meanings. They were created for some reason. And here we have examples of Tanya Chunagudova, who's been, we will be screening today, 10 minutes short movie, where she worked a lot with the costumes. She went to the museums, she made the 3D versions of those jewelry that was used. She modified it, she used 3D printing to produce it, super cool. And in the middle, it's a famous Polina Tami, a Chuvash artist, who is also very much into the understanding the context of the things that were used. And by the end of the lecture, I wanna start. Why do I show them here? They are all Tatar. That's because we do need some people to look at it. I know it's very important for queer people, I think, personally, because it was important for me, to have some kind of role model in a sense, or someone to look at. That this person is living a normal life, this person is there, I see the person, I am myself that person. And here I put some people from Tatar culture who are Tatars and who are gay, right? Or we can speculate that they're gay. This is Renata Litvinova and Zefira. They're both Tatar, and they kind of resemble a couple, not officially, they're not out, but everyone kind of knows. And if you go to TikTok or you go to lots of media space, they're pretty much loved and adored by the lesbian community, which is interesting. On the right, it's Rudolf Nureyev. It's the Tatar of Tatars. He's from Bashkortostan. He was born in he was raised in Ufa. He's from a Tatar-speaking family. He spoke Russian with an accent for what he was good, actually. And he was the first person to escape Soviet Union during work trip. Yeah. And he was very gay. He was very bisexual, but he had a very famous Danish partner. And for me, myself, it was a good, interesting example, because I see here a Tatar person, and I see an openly queer person. And some of you might know that I'm Tatar Prince. And I want to tell a short story why I am Tatar Prince. I think that this is Felix Yusupov, the one who killed Rasputin. Was he Tatar? He had a shajara, which is a family tree that would bring him all the way to the Prophet Muhammad. He was very proud of. No, actually, it would bring him to the royal blood of Nogai Horde, who are also considered as Tatars, as partly ancestors of Tatars. And he was the one who was exotifying his Tatar ancestry a lot. He loved to point it out. And here on the left, I found this picture. It actually says that it's a Russian person, but it very much looks like a Tatar person, especially the boots, which are very Tatar ethnic boots. And he used to do a lot cross-dressing. He wrote in his bibliography that he is bisexual. Yeah. And finally, to end my lecture, this is my project that you can check. It's Karamalan. I'm trying to show Kazakh queers, Kazakhstani queers, who are living just their life in Kazakhstan, reflecting on their identity and language. And I'm trying to make it on all the languages that we can. In Kazakh, in Russian, in English, because now they are a part of it. This is another person, and what is actually interesting, Tahawi was saying in the interview that when he speaks in Kazakh to Kazakh people about him being trans, they tend to be more friendly. We can think why this is. One thing is that within the Almaty, because now we're talking about Almaty, the biggest city, is very much Russian speaking. And the LGBT community, if you go to LGBT places, it's very much Russian speaking. And if we have some Kazakh speaking people there, they assemble communities. So it's an even smaller community within the small community. So they tend to accept each other more. It's one thing. But another thing is that Kazakh language itself is kind of gender neutral. So you kind of skip many parts explaining who you are, what you are, you just say, I am. And that's all. And yeah, concluding remarks, embrace your regional ethnic language identity, queer identity, feel free to contact me if you're interested in any of the present material. And yeah, I'm really liking research advisors or someone who could help me with this research, because when I was collecting all this material, it's a lot. It's difficult to structure it. And there is actually not much written on our space, Tatar and Kazakh space. So yeah, there was presenting Sultanat Shoshanova before, who is an academic in Berlin in gender studies. She does that research. I admire her a lot. And now we come to final things. Who wants to share? Who thinks the one wants to share? Yeah. I can just say that as Tatar person coming to Tatarstan, because I visited Tatarstan this twice and I learned Tatar, started learning Tatar just 2 years ago. I made a commitment to myself that when I come to Tatarstan, I will speak just Tatar. I won't speak Russian. I was really trying to adhere to that. And it would bring up many conversations, like why do you speak Tatar, why do you need it, etc. And I had a flashback, because the same thing happened when I was saying that I'm gay or I'm queer. People would start asking like, why do you need to say that, etc. And it's very much like this when you try to come out as Tatar speaking person in an unfriendly space where it's mostly Russian speaking. It's like a coming out to say, I'm Tatar speaking, I'm here. Yeah, that's one thing. And another thing is that as gay people, as queer people, we tend to think a lot about vocabulary. What words are correct to use? What are not correct to use? What could bring more offense, less offense, etc. And that makes us think a lot about what language. And it's very interesting because when you go right now into Kazakh, for example, LGBT community, there is so much discussion on the language. It's a lot. And this person who wrote it, Vivars, he is actually a Turcologist and he is gay. And yeah, this community is extremely intersected, at least in Kazakhstan. Thank you. You can take some tea, or maybe if you have questions, let's just first. Yeah.
I don't thought that I had to talk, so we can about that. Like the first one, it's really like, it made me think like you're talking about, finding the right words and going back to our, original language before Russian and a lot of other things. Thinking like, is it an option to have less words? Because we read this letter that I think we're working for, and you said, yeah, it's very gay to me. And I thought, yeah, maybe, but also maybe this is his way of looking, or maybe like where there is more space of looking this. And I feel that I also personally I need to define my relationship, and I can like swim.
Of course, and also it's related to time. At that time, maybe this way of talking to each other for men would be okay, and not considered to be gay or queer. It's just the prism that we see it through right now. And I showed it because it's important for modern gays in Kazakhstan to see that something was there. About the words, I was thinking about that a lot because, for example, can we skip, like, because in Kazakh media they use ticket to call trans femininity, right? Is it correct or it's not? Can we say you're not trans person, you're pustiket? No, not really, because our perception of genders, our perception of sexuality is so much connected to the West queer theory, to the West concepts that we have. It's not about eliminating one concept, it's more about combining and trying to find more grounds in that. And having less words is, of course, important, but not important, but could be easier. But I think now we are at the stage where we can't escape in a sense. Yeah.
So I think it is just related to the lack of vocabulary, and in Tatar I cannot say anything about because I don't speak it, I speak only Tatar.
Yeah.
And I just I would say that there is no words, and you have two possibilities. One is to follow Russian language because it is the closest. I would say, and the second possibility is just to
Yeah, because we kind of need these words now. but before maybe they were not needed, and we could think for the reasons why they were not needed. Is it because it was less homophobic? Maybe not. Is it because those people are just not present in the society?
Maybe it got lost.
Maybe got lost?
Yeah, these words maybe they did.
As you see in Tatar, for example, Hatunçay and Davkel, these words, Tatars here, do you know this word?
Which one?
Davkel, Hatunçay.
Actually like being invented by purists in 90s, because like if you go back to centuries, like in the beginning of 20th century, these words, they didn't use it. It's just like invented now by purists. So like, but for me, it's like first time hearing these words, although I was like working with them.
But I mean, maybe the words don't exist because we didn't look at the prism of. But again, like if we talk about the context of, I don't know, the colonization of America, so I think to say that the indigenous people there had multiple genders. They didn't have the concept of gender at all, but then on Thailand they still have many genders. But maybe they didn't have to work with transgender people because there was a concept of trans sexuality, right? Like maybe the word is not there because there wasn't the concept. But we still have to adapt to the westernization of society and the culture, but we have to create a new word. I don't think the one from there or yours and abroad.
Many things we can think of. Yeah. Mostly my point is that it's very interesting to look and reflect. And maybe it can help in some ways. And it can help especially in speaking the language when we are doing active and we're trying to speak the language of the people. Because we come to Kazakh person and say, I'm a binary gay person, the Kazakh won't understand that. More questions?
Oh, yes, I have one more also. So, I would just think about the concept of freedom, or freedom, and how to apply it, if you would like to apply.
So riyad is a concept of shame. It's being very much used in Kazakh context, but also Tatar context, in Turkic context, I would say. And it's being used a lot to shame women, especially. And there was a point in Kazakhstan several years ago when this concept was owned by people, by women. And they took it over. And yeah, now uyat is a bad concept. Because if you can say, oh, like you're bringing up uyat, this is a bad thing. Even though before it was something that would be brought a lot by the older people to the younger people. And this is like, it reminds me of the claiming the word queer in a sense, because it has a very negative connotation, but right now it kind of reversed. Which is super cool.
Is it a research project or?
I'm doing my PhD in medical science, so it's not ready to write. I would love to my research, but no. The thing is that I realized that actually I speak a lot on the language situation in Kazakhstan, language identity in Kazakhstan and Tatarstan. And I kind of got my first audience in TikTok. And I realized how diverse it is in terms of languages and religion and regional thing. And I started to search more, see what is behind there. And as I was interested in the language identity, I was as much interested in the queer identity because I'm queer myself. And I'm trying to proclaim myself as a queer Tatar Kazakh speaking person in a sense, and I need some foundation for that to not to argue with people, but to show them. I don't know. And yeah, and I just like screening all those things, looking at the language examples, how people are using them. And yeah, it's fascinating. Okay.
We have a break and
Yeah.
come back.
Feel free to have some tea and other chocolate.
I think it's
Yeah. Спасибо всем, кто слушал. Я вижу 5 людей. Петр Ахмед, Жур Ахмед. Я вас не слышу, но можете мне написать, если хотите, куда-нибудь. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put some music.